My daughter told me my life's work was worthless. She said I should be ashamed to even show my face at her wedding. I looked at the mountain of bills she expected me to pay, and I realized she was right about one thing. The life I was living, the one where I was just an open wallet, was worthless. So I gave her exactly what she asked for, an inheritance she would never forget, and a wedding day she'd be paying for the rest of her life. Before I tell you how a single phone call to my lawyer turned her dream wedding into a public nightmare, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. And hit that subscribe button if you believe that respect is something that must be earned, not bought. The air in my own living room felt foreign, thick with a tension that had no name, sitting like dust on the furniture I knew by heart. Across from me on the leather sofa my wife Isabel had picked out decades ago sat my daughter Chloe and her fiancé Jordan. This wasn't a visit. A visit implies warmth, a genuine desire for connection. This was a presentation, a corporate meeting where I was the sole investor and the only one without a vote. Resting on the solid oak coffee table I'd built with my own hands was a heavy leather-bound binder. It was ivory white with the words "The Wedding of Chloe and Jordan" embossed in gold foil. It looked more like a legal document than a celebration of love. Chloe turned its glossy pages with an alarming efficiency, her perfectly manicured nails tapping on photos of venues, flowers, and menus with price tags that could feed a small town. "So, you see, Dad," she began, her voice, a polished, emotionless monotone, as if reading from a script. "We've secured the venue, the Crestwood Estate. The Vance family has a history there. It meets a certain standard. You understand?" I nodded slowly. At 71 years old, I've learned that silence can be the most honest answer. I'm a civil engineer by trade. My entire life has been about foundations, stress loads, and numbers that don't lie. I understand standards. My standard is that a bridge must withstand a Category 5 hurricane. My daughter's standard, it seemed, was that the guests must be impressed by the cost of the champagne. "And these are the preferred vendors," she continued, pointing to a page filled with elegant logos. "We've gone with Lafleur Boutique for the florals. The owner assured me they can import the specific white peas from Holland that Jordan's mother prefers." Jordan, who until now had been sitting as still and ornamental as a lawn jockey, cleared his throat and offered me a well-rehearsed smile. "She'll be thrilled, Mr. Maxwell. It's the little details that make all the difference, you know." "Oh, I know about the little details. I know that a single loose bolt can compromise an entire steel structure. And I was getting the distinct feeling that there were a lot of loose bolts in this particular project. "It all sounds very thorough," I said, choosing my words with the care of a man writing a structural report. Chloe flipped to a page dense with spreadsheets. "This is the preliminary budget. I've factored in the major expenses. The venue fee is $120,000, which includes their basic catering package for 200 guests. The florals will be around $25,000. Photography and videography is $18,000. The dress, well, I'm still deciding, but we should budget at least $15,000. She recited these numbers as casually as if she were reading a grocery list. I didn't flinch. I spent over 40 years managing multi-million-dollar infrastructure projects. I'm not scared of large numbers. But those numbers represented concrete and steel projects that served communities for generations. What did these numbers represent? A 6-hour party. So, I said finally, looking her directly in the eye, what exactly do you need from me? Chloe closed the binder. The snap of the cover was sharp and final. The plan is in place. I just need you to ensure the payments are made on time. I've set up a joint account for all wedding-related expenses. All you have to do is fund it. And there it was. Not a question, not a, "What do you think, Dad?" I wasn't the father of the bride. I was the silent financier of an event where my only role was to sign the checks. I looked at my daughter, searching for the little girl who used to sit on my lap and trace the lines on my blueprints. All I saw was a stranger with sharp eyes and a flawless expenditure plan. "Oh, by the way," Chloe added, her tone as casual as if she were mentioning the weather. She was flipping back to the photographer section, comparing two different styles of lighting. "After the wedding, Jordan and I are planning to sell this house." If the financial figures were a series of small cuts, those words were a punch to the gut that knocked all the air out of me. It took a moment for my mind to even process them. This house, the house I bought when the lot was nothing but overgrown weeds and a prayer, the house whose first design was sketched on a napkin at a diner, with Isabel sitting beside me, debating the best placement for the kitchen window to catch the morning sun. "It's just so outdated," Chloe continued, her eyes still glued to the catalog, completely oblivious to the devastation she had just caused. "And we'll need a significant down payment for the new place in the Vance's neighborhood. A fresh start, you know, a fresh start by bulldozing the past." My gaze drifted from my daughter's cold expression to the portrait of Isabel above the fireplace. She was smiling, that gentle smile that could make you feel like the world was a safe and wonderful place. Behind her in the photo was the rose trellis I built for her. I remember the sweat on my brow as I mixed the mortar, laying each brick with precision. Isabel had brought me out a glass of iced tea, her own hands smudged with dirt from her garden. "It's going to be the most beautiful corner of the world, my love," she had said. And it was. Every summer those roses exploded in a riot of color, a living testament to a love that was patient and real. These hands of mine, now spotted with age, had laid every single paver on the back patio, the site of countless family barbecues, the place where Chloe took her first wobbly steps on the grass. This wasn't just a house. It was a container for a life's worth of memories. Every scratch on the hardwood floor told a story. The dent in the kitchen wall was from Chloe's first toy car. The faint water stain on the living room ceiling was the ghost of a champagne cork from our 25th anniversary. And now, all of it, the entire physical legacy of a lifetime of a marriage, was dismissed by my own daughter as outdated. The conflict was no longer about money. It had escalated into an unforgivable desecration, a sacrilege against the memory of the woman who gave her life. A chill ran down my spine. The young woman sitting across from me couldn't be Isabel's daughter. Isabel's daughter would never, ever be so cruel. I forced myself back to the present, back to the numbers, the only thing in the room that felt solid and real. I took a deep, steadying breath, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "Chloe," I said, pointing to a line item on the catering budget, $500 per plate. Are you sure about that? We could find a fantastic caterer for a third of that price. It was a logical question, the question of a man who spent his entire career optimizing costs without sacrificing quality. To Chloe, however, it was a personal attack. She sighed, a dramatic, theatrical sound of pure exasperation, as if I just asked her to explain quantum physics. "Dad," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "this isn't one of your construction bids where you can substitute grade A steel for grade B to save a few bucks. This is about image. It's about the experience. It's about making a statement of who we are. You just wouldn't understand. You wouldn't understand." Those 3 words hung in the air between us, building an invisible wall, a wall made of her arrogance and my stunned silence. The hairline fracture I had sensed earlier had just split wide open. In her eyes, I wasn't her father, the man who taught her how to ride a bike and build a birdhouse. I was just an old man with an outdated checkbook, a relic from a simpler time, who couldn't possibly grasp the complex social calculus of the world she so desperately wanted to join. Jordan, sensing the sudden drop in temperature, quickly jumped in. "What Chloe means, sir, is that the chef at the Crestwood is considered an artist. Each plate is a work of art. It's more than just food." I looked at the young man who would soon be my son-in-law. He delivered his lines with a practiced, hollow sincerity. He was just like her, caught in a world where an object's value was determined solely by its price tag. I didn't say another word. I just nodded. The meeting was over. I had received the blueprints. I understood my function. But as I watched them leave, saw Jordan's gleaming BMW disappear down the quiet suburban street, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This wasn't a project to build a wedding. It was a demolition project. And the foundation of my own family was about to be brought to the ground. Sleep did not come that night. Rest is for minds at peace, and my mind was a chaotic blueprint of a structure on the verge of collapse. The conversation with Chloe played over and over in my head, each word a hairline fracture spreading through the foundation of everything I thought I had built. But grief is a luxury, and I was raised in a world where problems weren't solved by feeling, but by doing. So I did the only thing I knew how to do when faced with a potential failure. I went to my study, turned on my computer, and began to analyze the data. My study has always been my sanctuary. It's a room of order and logic lined with books on structural mechanics, geology, and the history of architecture. My old drafting table still stands in the corner, a relic from another time. In this room, every problem has a solution that can be found with a sharp pencil, a clear mind, and a respect for the numbers. I sat down at my desk, the glow of the monitor illuminating my face, and opened the file Chloe had so efficiently shared with me. It was a spreadsheet titled Chloe and Jordan Wedding Master Plan. At first glance, it was impressive. Chloe had inherited my eye for organization. Everything was color-coded, categorized, and cross-referenced. There were tabs for the guest list, the vendors, the timeline. It was a perfect project plan. But a good engineer knows that the slickest presentation can often hide the deepest flaws. I clicked on the budget tab. The numbers I had heard earlier were all there, laid out in neat rows. $120,000 for the venue, $25,000 for flowers, and on it went. But then I started noticing the smaller, vaguer items. A $5,000 line item labeled Ambiance Enhancement. What was that? Special lighting? Scented candles? Another $7,500 for guest welcome packages. Were we giving them solid gold? The numbers felt soft, inflated like poorly mixed concrete full of air pockets. It was a budget designed to look comprehensive while hiding its own excess. This was the official story, the clean, parent-approved version of the project. But any man who has overseen a construction site knows that the real story is often in the subcontractor invoices, the unlisted expenses. My mind went to the supplementary credit card. I had given it to her when she went to college nearly 15 years ago. It was for emergencies, only a flat tire, a broken laptop, a last-minute flight home. I'd never taken her off the account. I trusted her. In all those years, she had barely used it. Out of curiosity, I had checked the balance a few months ago, and it was clean. Now, a cold feeling washed over me. I opened a new tab in my browser and logged into my bank's online portal. I navigated to the credit card statements, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I clicked on the most recent statement, and that's when the floor fell out from under me. The screen was filled with charges, dozens of them. This wasn't the spreadsheet's clean, organized fantasy. This was the messy, undeniable truth. My eyes scanned the list, and a new kind of cold, different from grief, began to settle in my bones. It was the cold of realization. The first thing I saw was a recurring monthly charge for the past 6 months, a consulting fee of $2,000 paid to the very same renowned wedding planner Chloe had mentioned. The spreadsheet only listed a one-time deposit. This meant she had been paying this planner in secret long before she ever presented me with the official binder. This wasn't a recent splurge. It was a calculated, long-term deception. The project had been running over budget before it was even formally approved. I kept scrolling down, my breath catching in my throat. There were charges from a rooftop bar in the city's most expensive district, a single charge for over $8,000. The memo read, Maxwell Vance engagement party. An engagement party? I was the father of the bride, and I hadn't even known there was an engagement party. I pictured Chloe raising a glass of champagne, surrounded by her new friends and the Vance family. All of it paid for with my money, while I sat at home completely oblivious. Then came the charges from Miami, Florida. Airline tickets, a 4-night stay at a beachfront hotel, charges from spas, exclusive restaurants, and a nightclub where a single bottle of vodka costs more than my first month's salary. The dates corresponded to a weekend Chloe had told me she was attending a marketing conference. It was her bachelorette party, a secret, lavish vacation built on a foundation of lies. My methodical review was now a descent into a nightmare. My mind, trained to see patterns, saw one clearly now, a pattern of absolute entitlement. Then I saw Jordan's name. A charge for $4,000 at Harrison's Fine Tailoring, a place known for making custom suits for bankers and politicians. A $2,000 charge at the exclusive Oakridge Country Club with the memo, "Groom's Golf Outing." My jaw tightened. This was beyond anything I could have imagined. They weren't just using my money for their wedding. They were using my emergency credit card, my trust, to finance Jordan's entry into the lifestyle of the rich and powerful. They were buying his way into his own family's world on my dime. I felt a wave of nausea. I had to stop leaning back in my chair and closing my eyes. I thought of Isabel. She respected a man's hard work. She knew the value of $1 because she knew the sweat it took to earn it. What would she think if she saw this? If she saw her daughter treating my life savings like a bottomless pit of cash to impress people who already had everything I had to see it all? I had to know the full extent of the damage. I took a deep breath and looked back at the screen. And there it was, the final killing blow. It was a charge made 3 months ago, a non-refundable deposit of $20,000. The vendor was Azure Travel, a high-end agency specializing in exotic vacations. The memo was sickeningly clear. Honeymoon package, overwater, bungalow, Maldives. They had booked their extravagant honeymoon before they had even booked the church. But it was the charge right below it that truly broke me. It was for $12,000 from a store called Modern Lifestyles, a place that sold minimalist furniture for astronomical prices. The date was from just last week. I almost didn't understand its significance until I remembered Chloe's casual, cruel words from earlier that evening. After the wedding, we're planning to sell this house. We'll need a down payment for the new place. They weren't just planning their party. They were already furnishing their new life, a life built on the sale of my home, the desecration of my memories, and funded by my complete and utter betrayal. I stared at the screen for a long time. The numbers blurred. They were no longer just figures. They were weapons. Each one was a testament to my daughter's greed and my own foolish blindness. The engineer in me took over. Then the hurt was still there, a deep, resonant ache, but it was now being overlaid with a grid of cold, hard logic. The problem had been identified. The structural weaknesses had been exposed. The extent of the failure was now fully documented. My job for the past 40 years was to fix failing structures, or when the damage was too great to oversee their controlled demolition. I closed the laptop. The quiet click echoed in the silent room. I finally knew the full scope of the project, and now I knew exactly what I had to do. With the full damning report of my daughter's betrayal glowing on the screen in front of me, a strange calm settled over my soul. The shock had passed, and the hot sting of anger had cooled into something harder, more resolute. I was an engineer who had just discovered a fatal flaw in a critical support beam. The emotional response was secondary to the structural reality. The structure was compromised. It was going to fail. Now I just needed to conduct one final test, a test of its integrity to see if there was anything at all left to salvage. My eyes drifted over the spreadsheet one last time, landing on a single line item. Bridal gown budget, $15,000. $15,000. It was more than I made in my first 2 years of working. But it wasn't the number itself that struck me. It was the memory it desecrated. I leaned back and the sterile light of the monitor faded as my mind traveled back more than 40 years. I was in this very house, but it was younger then, filled with the scent of fresh paint and new beginnings. And from the spare bedroom, which served as her sewing room, came a gentle, rhythmic humming. It was the sound of Isabel's old Singer sewing machine, a sound that for months was the lullaby of our evenings. She was making her wedding dress. I remembered the fabric. It wasn't imported silk or fancy French lace. It was a bolt of simple, elegant cotton lace she'd found on sale at a small shop downtown. She saw beauty where others saw a bargain. I remember her sitting on the floor, surrounded by patterns and scraps of white fabric, her brow furrowed in concentration, a look of fierce, joyful determination on her face. She poured hundreds of hours into that dress. Every stitch was a testament to her patience, her skill, and her belief that the most valuable things in life are those you create with your own hands and your own heart. On our wedding day, she was radiant. The dress wasn't a status symbol, it was a part of her. It told the story of who we were, two young people with more love than money, building a life from scratch. She was never more beautiful. After the wedding, she packed it away with reverent care in a cedar chest at the foot of our bed, but it's still there now, resting in the dark, a silent witness to a lifetime of love. With that warm, aching memory filling my heart, I picked up my phone. I knew what Chloe's answer would likely be, but I had to hear it. I had to give her one last chance to show that a piece of her mother, a piece of the values we had tried so hard to instill in her, still remained. I scrolled to her name and pressed the call button. She answered on the third ring, her voice impatient. "Dad, it's late. Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine, Chloe," I said, keeping my own voice level and calm. I was just looking over the budget again, and I had a thought. A sigh from her end of the line. If this is about the catering again, I really don't have the energy. "No, it's not about the catering," I said. "It's the wedding dress. $15,000 is a significant amount." I paused, letting the statement hang in the air. "It got me thinking about your mother's dress. Do you remember it? The one she made herself. She was so proud of it. It's still packed away perfectly upstairs in the cedar chest. I was offering her a lifeline, a bridge back to a world where things had meaning beyond their price. I was silently begging her to remember, to understand. Her response came instantly, a short, sharp laugh, devoid of any warmth. "Dad, are you being serious right now? That old thing? It's probably yellow and smells like mothballs. We're getting married at the Crestwood estate, not in a community hall. I can't show up wearing some dusty homemade dress. My God, what would the Vances think? And there it was, the final diagnostic result. She didn't just dismiss the idea, she mocked it. She took a memory that was sacred to me, a symbol of her mother's beautiful soul, and she trampled on it with the heel of her ambition. What would the Vances think? That was the only question that mattered to her. Not what would my mother have wanted, not what would honor my family's history. A profound and final sadness washed over me, extinguishing the last flicker of hope. I had my answer. The daughter Isabel and I had raised the little girl who loved hearing stories about how we built our life together was gone. In her place was a stranger, one who would gladly sell her mother's memory for the approval of wealthy in-laws. It was no longer a question of money, it was a question of preservation. I had to protect the legacy of my wife, the sanctity of our life together, from the one person who should have been its most devoted guardian. I see, I said, my voice quiet, but the decision behind it as solid as granite. You're right. It was a silly thought. Good night, Chloe. I hung up the phone before she could reply. The test was complete. The structure was condemned. After the phone call with Chloe, I sat in the dark of my study for a long time. The numbers on the computer screen were no longer just evidence of financial betrayal. They were symptoms of a deeper sickness, a rot in the values of the daughter I thought I knew. I had analyzed her role in this disaster, but every failing structure has more than one point of weakness. I needed to understand Jordan's part in all of this. Was he a reluctant passenger on Chloe's runaway train of ambition? Or was he in the driver's seat beside her? There was only one way to find out. The next morning I called him. My voice was even friendly. Jordan, it's Leo. I was hoping you might have time for a coffee this morning. I'd like to go over a few of the wedding financials, Manto Man. There was a brief hesitation on the other end of the line, a silence just long enough for me to register it. Oh, sure, Leo, of course. Where should we meet, he finally said, his voice a little too bright, a little too eager. We met at a small, quiet coffee shop downtown, a neutral territory. I arrived early and chose a table in the corner away from the morning rush. I placed a simple manila folder on the table in front of me. It contained the printouts of the credit card statements. It wasn't an accusation. It was a blueprint of the truth. Jordan walked in a few minutes later, wearing a polo shirt that probably cost more than my first suit. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Leo, good to see you, he said, shaking my hand. His palm was damp. Thanks for coming, Jordan, I said calmly, gesturing for him to sit. I won't take up too much of your time. I didn't engage in small talk. An engineer doesn't waste time on pleasantries when a foundation is cracking. I opened the folder. I've been reviewing the wedding expenses. I began sliding the first statement across the table, and I found some discrepancies I was hoping you could clear up. For instance, this charge here for over $8,000, an engagement party at the Monarch Rooftop Bar. I don't recall being invited to an engagement party. Jordan's eyes darted down to the paper, then back up to me. A flicker of panic crossed his face before he masked it with a forced laugh. Oh, that right. It was all very last minute, Leo. A few of our friends just wanted to do something special for us. Chloe was going to tell you, but we didn't want to bother you with the small stuff. $8,000 is not small stuff, Jordan, I said, my voice remaining perfectly level. I pointed to the next set of charges, and I'm not sure a bachelorette weekend in Miami costing nearly $10,000 qualifies as small stuff either. He paused, stammering. That was for Chloe and her friends. I wasn't involved in that. He was trying to build a firewall to isolate himself from her spending. It was a weak defense. I see, I said. I slid the second statement in front of him. Then perhaps you can explain these. My finger landed on a charge for $4,000 at Harrison's Fine Tailoring, then another for a golf outing at the exclusive Oakridge Country Club. These seem to have your name on them. I gave Chloe that card for emergencies. I'm trying to understand how a custom-tailored suit and a round of golf with your buddies qualify. His facade crumbled. The practiced smile vanished, replaced by the panicked look of a young man caught in a lie he wasn't clever enough to maintain. He opened his mouth, then closed it. There was no explanation. The numbers didn't lie. He looked down at his hands, then up at me, his eyes pleading. Leo, I can explain. I leaned forward slightly, my voice dropping but losing none of its intensity. Then please do. I am a reasonable man, Jordan, but I am also a man who has worked hard for every penny I have. I thought I was helping you and my daughter start a life together, but this, I gestured to the papers on the table, this isn't building a life, this is putting on a performance. So I'll ask you again, explain it to me. He finally broke. He slumped in his chair, the picture of defeat. It's my parents, he said, his voice barely a whisper. The Vances. They live in a different world, Leo, a world of expectations. Everything is about appearances, who you know, where you go, what you wear. He looked at me, and for the first time I saw something genuine in his eyes. Fear. When Chloe and I got engaged, the pressure started. My mother started making comments about our standards, about Chloe fitting in Chloe. But she took it hard. She feels like she constantly has to prove herself to them, to prove that she belongs. He took a shaky breath and delivered the final, fatal blow to my heart. She just wants to show them that she's one of them, that her family can provide the same kind of life, the same kind of wedding that they expect. She wants them to be proud of her, to be proud of us. There it was, the fundamental truth of the entire project laid bare on a coffee shop table. It was never about love. It was never about celebrating a union. It was a desperate, expensive attempt to buy my daughter a membership into a club that looked down on her. And my life's work, my savings, my late wife's legacy was nothing more than the application fee. I was being used as leverage in a social transaction I hadn't even known was taking place. Jordan wasn't just an accomplice. He was the primary beneficiary of this fraud. He got to look good for his parents, and I was the one footing the bill. I slowly gathered the papers and placed them back in the folder. I looked at Jordan, this weak, frightened young man who had let my daughter sacrifice her own father's dignity for the sake of appearances. I felt no anger, Anger would imply an emotional connection, and that connection had just been severed. All I felt was a profound, chilling clarity. The final data point was in. The analysis was complete. "Thank you for your honesty, Jordan," I said, my voice as calm as if I were closing a business meeting. I stood up, leaving him sitting there amidst the ruins of his excuses. "It's been very illuminating." I placed a $10 bill on the table to cover the coffees and walked out of the shop, not looking back. I had confirmed the integrity of all the components, and they had all failed the test. The demolition could now begin. After my meeting with Jordan, the path forward was clear. The data was collected, the analysis was complete. An engineer knows you do not argue with the laws of physics, and I knew now that I could not argue with the fundamental nature of my daughter or her fiancé. There was only one step left before initiating a controlled demolition, a final, formal presentation of the structural limits. I decided to host one last dinner. I spent the afternoon in the kitchen, the familiar weight of my cast-iron pot a comforting presence in my hands. I was making beef stew, Isabel's recipe. It was a simple, honest meal, the kind that fills a home with a scent of warmth and memory. As I chopped the carrots and onions, my movements methodical and precise, my mind was not on the wedding, but on the past. I remembered cooking this same meal with Isabel on cold winter nights, the windows fogged up, our laughter echoing in the small, warm kitchen. This house wasn't just a structure of wood and nails. It was a vessel for a lifetime of such moments. I was not just fighting for my retirement fund. I was fighting for the sanctity of this vessel. I called Chloe that afternoon. "I'd like for you and Jordan to come for dinner tonight," I said, my voice even. "I think it's time we finalized the wedding budget once and for all." "Fine," she said, her voice cool and businesslike. "We can be there at 7. There was no warmth, no curiosity. It was an appointment she was agreeing to. They arrived exactly on time, bringing a bottle of wine that cost more than my weekly groceries. They presented it to me as if it were a diplomatic offering. The air was thick with unspoken tension. We sat at the heavy oak dining table, the same table where Chloe Fu had done her homework as a child, where we had celebrated every birthday and holiday for 30 years. Now it felt like a boardroom table, and we were 3 adversaries pretending to be a family. I served the stew. It was rich and fragrant, the meat tender enough to be cut with a fork. Jordan ate his with a polite, vacant enthusiasm. Chloe barely touched hers. She pushed the pieces of potato and carrot around her bowl with her fork. "It's delicious, Dad," she said, her voice flat. "Just a little heavy. I'm trying to watch my carbs before the wedding." The casual cruelty of the remark almost made me laugh. Here she was planning to spend $250,000 of my money, but she was worried about the carbohydrates in a potato. We ate in a near silence, punctuated only by the clinking of silverware and meaningless small talk about the weather and traffic. I watched them. I saw how they avoided looking at the family photos on the walls. I saw how Chloe's eyes scanned the room, not with nostalgia, but with the detached gaze of an appraiser estimating its market value. My analysis was confirmed with every passing silent minute. When the meal was over, I cleared the plates. Jordan stood up, looking restless. "Well, this was great, Leo. We should probably get going." "Sit down, Jordan," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it had a new weight to it, a tone that made him immediately obey. I went to my study and returned with a different folder. This one was old and worn. It didn't contain their credit card statements. It contained my life. I sat down and opened it on the table right next to the half-empty wine glasses. "You wanted to finalize the budget," I said. "Let's finalize it." I slid the first document across the table. It was the statement for my retirement fund, my 401k, the account I had diligently contributed to with every paycheck for over 40 years. "This is it," I said. "This is what I have left to live on for the next 20, maybe 30 years. I then showed them my projected Social Security income, my assets, my property tax statements, my estimated health care costs. I wasn't emotional. I presented it all with the calm, detached clarity of an engineer explaining a blueprint. "The budget you have presented," I continued, pointing to their pristine leather binder, which sat on the sideboard like an unexploded bomb, "is not a budget. It is a liquidation plan. To fund it, I would have to sell this house immediately. I would have to cash out my entire retirement fund, paying massive penalties and taxes. I would be left with almost nothing." I let the reality of the words sink in. Chloe stared at the papers, her brow furrowed, not in sympathy, but in annoyance, as if my financial survival was an inconvenient obstacle to her plans. "I have spent my entire life building things," I said, my voice low and steady. "Bridges, buildings, a family, a future. I did it all by understanding one fundamental principle. You cannot put more stress on the structure than it is designed to bear. If you do, it doesn't just bend, it breaks. And I will not break." I looked from my daughter's resentful face to Jordan's pale, nervous one. I then slid a single piece of paper into the center of the table. It was a cashier's check. "This is my final offer," I said. "This is $80,000. You can have a beautiful, wonderful wedding with this. It is a generous gift from a father who loves his daughter. It is also the absolute structural limit. It is the most this foundation can bear before it collapses. You can accept this gift and we can move forward, or you can refuse it. But there is no negotiation. There is no more money. This is the final number." I leaned back in my chair. I had laid the facts on the table. I had presented my final, unchangeable terms. The entire weight of their extravagant dreams and my financial future now rested on this single moment. The silence in the room was absolute. A vacuum waiting for the explosion I knew was about to come. I looked at my daughter's face, watching as disbelief turned to contempt, and I waited. The silence that followed my offer was heavier than any I had ever known. It was the crushing weight of a lifetime of sacrifice being weighed and measured by my daughter and being found wanting. Chloe stared at the cashier's check on the table, not as a gift, but as an obstacle. Her eyes, cold and hard, slowly lifted to meet mine. There was no gratitude in them, not even disappointment. There was only a profound and chilling contempt. Then she laughed. It was not a sound of amusement. It was a single, sharp, ugly burst of sound like glass shattering in the quiet room. $80,000, she said, her voice dripping with a scorn that physically hurt. Is that it? Is that really all you think I'm worth? She shook her head, a slow, pitting motion, as if I were a child who simply couldn't grasp a basic concept. You just don't get it, do you? You never have. She stood up then, her chair scraping harshly against the hardwood floor. She began to pace her movements, agitated, her energy, turning the dining room into a cage. This isn't about just having a nice wedding, Dad. This is about my future. This is about the life Jordan and I are building. It's about taking our place in a world you know nothing about. Her voice grew louder, laced with years of resentment I never knew existed. You've spent your entire life in some dusty office drawing boring blueprints for things nobody cares about. You get excited about different kinds of concrete. You build bridges that people drive over without a second thought for communities you'll never be a part of. You come home every night with dirt under your fingernails, proud of a day's work that the world completely ignores. She stopped pacing and turned to face me, her eyes blazing with a cruel fire. What do you have to show for it all? This outdated house, a pension fund? Your whole life has been about being sensible, being practical, being small. There is nothing impressive about you. There is nothing to be proud of. She leaned forward, her hands flat on the table, her face just inches from mine, and she delivered the final verdict, the words that would echo in my mind forever. Your life, she spat, is worthless. The word hung in the air, an irreversible poison, and Jordan just sat there. He didn't say a word. He didn't touch her arm to calm her down. He didn't look at me with an apology in his eyes. He just stared at his empty plate, a silent, spineless accomplice to my character assassination. His silence was his signature on her declaration. He agreed with every single word. Something inside me didn't break. It froze. The part of my heart that held a father's unconditional love for his daughter turned to ice, then to granite. The pain was so immense, so absolute, that it became something else entirely. It became clarity. I was no longer looking at my child. I was looking at a hostile stranger who happened to share my DNA. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend myself. An engineer does not argue with a failed stress test. He documents the results. I looked at her, my face a mask of calm. I slowly reached out, picked up the cashier's check, and tore it in half. Then in half again. The sound of the paper ripping was the only noise in the room. Chloe's eyes widened, a flicker of shock finally breaking through her rage. Don't even bother showing up to the wedding, she said, her voice trembling with fury. Your presence would just be an embarrassment. I gave a single, slow nod. All right, Chloe, I said. My voice was unnervingly quiet. If that's what you want. I stood up from the table, walked past my daughter and her silent fiancé, and went into my study. I closed the heavy oak door behind me, the soft click of the latch sounding as final as a tomb ceiling shut. The storm had passed. The final irreparable crack had shattered the foundation, and in the dead, quiet calm that followed, I began to draw the blueprints for a brand new project. I didn't hear them leave. I didn't hear the front door close or the sound of their car pulling away. The world outside my study had ceased to exist. Inside, there was only the profound, ringing silence left behind by my daughter's final, brutal judgment. "Your life is worthless." The words did not echo. They settled. They became a part of the room as solid and real as the oak desk beneath my hands. For a long time, I didn't move. I simply sat, letting the full weight of the moment press down on me. There was a deep, seismic pain, the kind a father feels when the child he created looks at him and sees nothing of value. It was an agony that threatened to swallow me whole, to pull me down into a dark abyss of grief and regret. I could have stayed there. I could have let the sorrow become my final project, spending the rest of my years lost in the wreckage of what my family had become. But then something else began to stir within the silence. It was the engineer, the man I had been for more than 40 years, the part of me that does not crumble in the face of failure, but instead picks up a clipboard and begins the damage assessment. The pain was still there, a constant low hum, but it was no longer the only sound. A new voice, one of logic and order, began to cut through the emotional chaos. My mind, unbidden, started to analyze the evening not as a family drama, but as a structural failure. The initial design of our family, built on love and mutual respect, had been fundamentally compromised. Years of entitlement and greed were the equivalent of corrosive salt air eating away at reinforced steel. The final load test, my offer of $80,000, had been applied, and the result was catastrophic, total structural collapse. Grief is an unproductive emotion in the face of such a failure. It doesn't rebuild, it doesn't reinforce, it simply observes the rubble. But an engineer sees rubble and immediately begins to conceptualize a new design. My life was not worthless. It was a well-built structure founded on hard work, integrity, and love for a woman who understood its true value. It had weathered storms. It had provided shelter. It had stood the test of time. It was my daughter's perception that was flawed, not my life's construction. And in that moment, sitting in the quiet dark of my study, the transformation was complete. The grieving father receded, and the architect took his place. The pain was still the foundation, but on top of it, I began to lay the groundwork for a new project. It would not be a project of anger or revenge. It would be a project of correction, a project of order, a project to demonstrate in the clearest and most structurally sound way possible the true and undeniable worth of a life well lived. I turned on my desk lamp. The warm light cut a comb through the darkness. I pulled out a fresh notepad and a sharpened pencil. The blank page didn't look empty. It looked like an opportunity. It was time to draw up a new set of blueprints. The next morning I woke before the sun. For the first time in months, my mind was not a fog of anxiety and hurt. It was a clean, well-lit drafting table. The pain was still there, a deep foundational ache, but it was no longer a weakness. It was now the bedrock upon which I would build. I showered, dressed in a crisp shirt and trousers, and made a pot of strong black coffee. I did not feel like a grieving father. I felt like an engineer on the first day of a new vital project. At precisely 8 o'clock, I made my first call. My financial advisor, Michael, has handled my portfolio for nearly 20 years. He's a cautious, steady man, much like myself. When I sat down in his office, he greeted me with his usual warm, professional smile. "Leo, good to see you. Just here for our quarterly review." "No, Michael," I said, my voice calm and direct. "I'm here to restructure my entire portfolio. The objective is no longer long-term growth. The new objective is immediate asset protection and strategic reallocation." Michael's smile faded, replaced by a look of deep concern. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Leo, is everything all right? Are you in some kind of trouble? Is anyone pressuring you?" "I've never been more clear-headed in my life," I assured him, and it was the absolute truth. I briefly explained the situation, not with the emotion of a wounded father, but with the cold facts of a CEO reporting a hostile takeover attempt by a rogue board member. I told him about the wedding expenses, the secret credit card charges, and the plan to sell my home. He listened patiently, his expression shifting from concern to professional outrage. "This is a gross violation of trust, Leo. We need to lock things down immediately." "Exactly," I said. "First, I want to liquidate a significant portion of my stock portfolio. I want to convert it to cash. Second, I want to close every joint account and cancel any supplementary credit cards tied to my name. Third, and most importantly, I want to talk about creating an irrevocable trust." Michael nodded, his mind already working. "An irrevocable trust is the strongest form of asset protection," he explained, confirming what my late-night research had suggested. "Once you place assets into it, they're no longer legally considered part of your personal estate. They cannot be touched by creditors, they are not subject to claims in a lawsuit, and they cannot be controlled by anyone who might, for instance, try to gain power of attorney over your affairs by having you declared mentally incompetent." His words hit the mark. It was a defense against a move I hadn't even fully considered, but knew Chloe and the Vances would be capable of. "That is precisely what I want," I said. "I want to create a financial fortress, Michael, and I want you to be the one who drafts the plans." He looked at me, a new respect in his eyes. "Consider it done, Leo. We'll start the paperwork today." I left his office with the first part of my new structure underway. My next stop was a few blocks away at the law firm of Carter and Associates. Ben Carter was the son of an old friend, a sharp, energetic young lawyer who had taken over his father's practice. He had a reputation for being brilliant and, when necessary, ruthless. When I sat down in his modern, sunlit office, I didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Ben," I started, "I am here to discuss two things: the complete and total disinheritance of my daughter, Chloe Maxwell, and the simultaneous creation of a charitable foundation." Ben's eyebrows shot up, but he remained professional. He leaned back in his chair. "That's a significant course of action, Leo. May I ask what brought this on?" "You may," I said. I slid a single sheet of paper across his glass desk. It was a summarized list of the credit card expenditures, the secret wedding planner fees, the parties, the custom suits, the honeymoon deposit. This is a summary of the financial exploitation. The motive became clear after my daughter informed me that my life's work was, and I quote, worthless, and that my presence at her wedding would be an embarrassment. "This is no longer a family matter, Ben. This is a business transaction that has gone sour, and I am dissolving the partnership." Ben studied the paper, his expression hardening with every line item he read. "I see," he said, his voice quiet but edged with steel. "This is egregious." He looked up at me. "So, what's the plan?" This was the moment, the unveiling of the full blueprint. "First," I said, "the wedding. I am the sole financier on all vendor contracts. I want you to draft letters of withdrawal effective immediately. We will terminate every contract and cancel every payment." Ben nodded. "Perfectly legal. They have no standing if you are the one paying." "Second, the house. It is fully paid off, and the deed is in my name alone. I want to put it on the market by the end of the week." "Also, you're right," Ben confirmed. "And third, the most important part," I said, leaning forward. "The bulk of my liquid assets, the money from the stock liquidation and the future sale of the house, will be the founding endowment for a new charitable organization. I want to call it the Isabel Maxwell Foundation." Ben's professional demeanor cracked for a moment, and a genuine smile touched his lips. "Isabel Maxwell," he said softly. "My dad always said she was one of the finest women he ever knew." "She was," I said, a lump forming in my throat for the first time that day. "And her foundation will have a single clear purpose: to provide full scholarships for underprivileged students entering the civil engineering program at the state university. My daughter believes my career was worthless. I'm going to use my life savings to prove that the work I did can build dozens, maybe hundreds of new lives." Ben was silent for a long moment, looking at me with an expression of awe. He finally leaned forward, placing his hands on his desk. "Leo," he said, his voice filled with a newfound energy, "this is not just a legal strategy. This is a work of art. It's airtight, it's defensible, and, frankly, it's poetic justice." He grinned. "I would be honored to be your architect on this project. Let's get to work." Leaving Ben Carter's office, I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't known in years. The grief had not vanished, but it had been transformed. It was no longer a weight, but fuel. I was no longer a victim reacting to a crisis. I was an engineer executing a flawless design. The world looked different. The lines of the buildings seemed sharper, the sky a clearer blue. The project had begun. My first stop was not my home, but a small cafe down the street. I sat with a cup of black coffee and took out my phone. The demolition phase needed to be swift, clean, and decisive. The first support beam to be severed was the line of credit. I dialed the number on the back of my credit card. After navigating the automated menu, a cheerful customer service agent answered. "Thank you for calling. How can I help you, Mr. Maxwell?" "Hello," I said, my voice calm and steady. "I need to report a card as compromised and cancel the account immediately." I read out the number of the supplementary card I had given Chloe. "Oh, I'm very sorry to hear that, sir," the agent said with practiced empathy. "Can you tell me about the suspicious charges?" "The charges are numerous and extensive," I replied, my voice devoid of emotion. "But the primary issue is that my trust has been compromised. Please close the card. Do not issue a replacement." There was a pause, then the sound of typing. "All right, Mr. Maxwell. I have placed a permanent block on the card and closed the account. It can no longer be used." "Thank you," I said, and ended the call. The first cut was made. It was clean and bloodless. Next, I called the manager at my local bank branch, a man I had known for 30 years. "Tom," I said, "it's Leo Maxwell. I need a favor. I need you to close the joint account I set up last week, the one titled Maxwell Vance Wedding, and I need you to transfer the full remaining balance back to my primary checking account. Can you do that for me today?" "Of course, Leo," he said, his voice warm, but sensing the seriousness in mine. "Consider it done. Is everything okay?" Everything I said is finally being put in order. With the financial taps turned off, it was time to dismantle the structure itself. I pulled up the vendor list Chloe had so proudly shared. At the top was the wedding planner, a woman named Genevieve. I dialed her number. She answered with a voice that sounded like expensive perfume. "Genevieve de la Cruz." "Hello, Miss de la Cruz," I said. "This is Leo Maxwell. I am the sole financier for the Maxwell Vance wedding." "Mr. Maxwell," she gushed. "So lovely to hear from you. Chloe was just telling me about the magnificent centerpieces we've designed." "I'm calling to inform you," I said, cutting through her pleasantries, "that I am officially withdrawing all funding for this event, effective immediately. Your services are no longer required." The silence on the other end of the line was immediate and absolute. I beg your pardon," she finally stammered. "Due to a material change in circumstances, the event is canceled," I stated, reciting the legal phrase Ben had advised me to use. "I am terminating our agreement." But the deposits, the contracts." "We have a non-refundable policy." Her voice was rising, a frantic edge creeping in. "I am aware of the policies," I said calmly. "My decision is final. Please direct any further correspondence to my lawyer, Ben Carter. His office will handle the dissolution of all formal agreements. Have a good day." I hung up before she could sputter another word. One by one I went down the list. The Crestwood estate was next. A polite but firm gentleman informed me that my $120,000 deposit was indeed non-refundable. "I understand completely," I told him. "The deposit is forfeit. Please consider this my official notice of cancellation." He was so taken back by my lack of argument that he could only manage a quiet, "Very well, sir." I made the call to Lafleur Boutique, canceling the $25,000 order for Dutch peonies. I called the photographer, the videographer, and the live band. The script was always the same. Hello, this is Leo Maxwell, financier for the Maxwell Vance wedding. The reactions ranged from confusion to outrage, but my response never wavered. My decision is final. Please contact my lawyer, Ben Carter. With each call, I felt a weight lifting. I wasn't just canceling a party. I was reclaiming my life, one vendor at a time. The next phase of the project was not about demolition, but about construction. The following day, I met with a real estate agent, a sharp woman named Sarah, who had the best sales record in the county. We stood in my living room, the same room where my life had been declared worthless just 2 nights before. "It's a beautiful home, Leo," she said, looking around. "Strong bones. It'll get a lot of interest." "I don't want a lot of interest," I told her. "I want a single, clean sale. I'm not interested in bidding wars or waiting for the perfect offer. Price it to sell. I'm ready to move on." She looked at me, saw the resolve in my eyes, and nodded. "I understand. I'll have the listing up by tomorrow and a for sale sign on the lawn this afternoon." The final and most important step took place back in Ben Carter's office. He had worked with incredible speed. Spread across his conference table were a series of thick, official-looking documents. He slid the top one over to me. "This is it, Leo," he said. "The official charter for the Isabel Maxwell Foundation." I read the words. It was all there in crisp legal language. A nonprofit organization dedicated to providing full 4-year university scholarships to promising underprivileged students who wish to pursue a degree in civil engineering. My heart swelled with a feeling I couldn't quite name. It was pride, but deeper. It was love, but broader. It was the feeling of creating something that would outlast me, something that Isabel would have been immensely proud of. Ben pointed to the signature line. "Once you sign this, Leo, the foundation legally exists, and once you make the first deposit, it is funded. And because we structured it as an irrevocable trust, it is permanent. No one can ever touch it." "Some things should be permanent, Ben," I said, picking up the heavy pen. "Some things should be built to last." My signature was steady and clear. I, Leo Maxwell, was no longer just a retired engineer. I was the founder and chairman of a legacy. Ben slid a bank transfer authorization form in front of me. "The new account is open and ready." I looked at the form. With another stroke of the pen, I transferred a substantial sum, the first of many, into the foundation's account. It was the money that had been sitting in the joint wedding account, the money that was supposed to pay for champagne and a celebrity wedding planner. Now it would pay for textbooks, for lab equipment, for the dreams of the young person who, like me, wanted to build things that matter. As I left Ben's office, I felt a profound sense of peace. The demolition was complete. The new foundation was poured. The blueprints for my own future were finally clear. All the pieces were in place. The trap was set. Now all I had to do was wait for my daughter to walk into it. The weeks leading up to the wedding were silent. I heard nothing from Chloe. No angry voicemails, no pleading text messages. It was as if, after our final dinner, I had simply ceased to exist in her world. It was a strange, hollow peace. but I knew it was the calm before the storm. I had meticulously removed the load-bearing walls from her fantasy, and it was only a matter of time before the entire structure came crashing down. I didn't have to be there to see it. An engineer knows his own demolition plan. I could picture the entire sequence of events with perfect, chilling clarity. I imagine the morning began with a sense of triumph for her. She would have been in the presidential suite of a 5-star hotel, the air thick with the scent of hairspray and expensive perfume. A team of stylists would be fluttering around her, her bridesmaids laughing and sipping champagne. In her mind, she had won. Her sulking, out-of-ouch father had been put in his place, and her glorious new life was just hours away from beginning. She would have felt untouchable, basking in the glow of her imminent victory. The first sign of trouble would have been small, a single vibrating buzz from her phone, easily dismissed as just another well-wisher. But it would be the florist. A polite, confused voice on the other end. "Miss Maxwell, this is Annette from La Fleur Boutique. I'm so sorry, but we're calling to confirm the cancellation of your entire floral order for this afternoon. We received a legal notice from your father's attorney, and the final payment was withdrawn." Chloe would have scoffed, her annoyance barely registering. A mistake, some clerical error her incompetent father had made. "That's ridiculous," she would snap. "There's no cancellation. You send those flowers as planned." She would hang up, irritated but unshaken, telling her bridesmaids it was just another thing she had to manage herself. But a few minutes later, another call, this time the photographer. His tone would be less polite, more businesslike. "Chloe, it's Mark. Listen, I don't know what's going on, but we can't shoot your wedding. The check for the remaining balance bounced this morning. And then we got a formal contract termination from a lawyer named Ben Carter. He said, all funding has been pulled. I'm sorry, but we're out." The word lawyer would be the first tremor of real fear. This was organized. This wasn't a simple oversight. Her own phone would feel slick in her suddenly damp palm. She would try to call me then. The call would go straight to voicemail. She would try again. Voicemail. A knot of pure panic would begin to form in her stomach, and then the avalanche would begin. Her phone would light up a relentless assault. A text from the limo company. Final payment declined. All cars canceled. An email from the band leader. Urgent funding withdrawn by client Leo Maxwell. We will not be performing. The calls would become a flood. The caterer, the lighting technician, the rental company for the fine china. Each call was another hammer blow, another part of her perfect day crumbling into dust. I can see her pacing the suite in her silk robe, her carefully applied makeup starting to look like a mask of desperation. Jordan would be standing uselessly in the corner, pale and speechless, repeatedly trying my number with the same lack of success. Her bridesmaids would be silent, their champagne glasses untouched, watching a fairy tale transform into a train wreck in real time. The final frantic call would be from Genevieve de la Cruz, the wedding planner, and she would not be polite. She would be screaming, her voice a shrill symphony of terror and rage. "Chloe, what in God's name did you do? Everything is gone. The Crestwood estate just called me. They've locked the gates. They cited a cancellation notice from your father's lawyer. My reputation is ruined. Every vendor is calling me, threatening to sue. What is going on? Clinging to one last desperate thread of hope, they would decide they had to see it for themselves. It had to be a bluff, a terrible, cruel misunderstanding that could be fixed if they just showed up. The scene I picture next is the one that brings me a grim, quiet satisfaction. A gleaming black limousine, the last uncanceled part of her fantasy, pulling up to the magnificent wrought iron gates of the Crestwood estate. Inside would be Chloe, her face a mask of terror, Jordan a statue of impotence, and his parents, the formidable Mr. and Mrs. Vance, their faces carved from granite. They would have come to the hotel to see what was causing the delay, only to be swept up in the chaos, and they would arrive to find the gates firmly, undeniably shut, chained, and padlocked. Affixed to the bars would be a simple, professionally printed sign. Its message would be brutal in its clarity. Private event scheduled for October 15th, canceled. The silence in the car would be absolute. Then the sounds of their world ending. Chloe would let out a sound somewhere between a sob and a scream. Jordan would be muttering, "Oh my God, oh my God," over and over. But it would be the faces of the Vances that told the real story. Their carefully constructed masks of aristocratic calm would shatter, replaced by the naked fury of public humiliation. This was their world, their circle, and right now other limousines would be pulling up behind them, filled with their friends and business partners, all of them witnesses to this unprecedented social disaster. Their son's wedding, the event meant to cement their status, had just become the most embarrassing fiasco of the year. I wasn't there to see the tears or hear the screams. I didn't need to be. I knew the outcome the moment I signed the first cancellation order. A structure built on a foundation of lies, greed, and disrespect cannot stand. I didn't push it over. I simply removed the temporary props that were holding it up, and I let the laws of physics do the rest. After the public implosion at the Crestwood estate, I knew they would come. A cornered animal, especially one as proud as my daughter had become, doesn't just run away, it attacks. I didn't hide. I didn't lock the doors. I simply continued with my work. I was in the living room, the heart of the house, surrounded by cardboard boxes and stacks of old newspapers for wrapping. Each object I picked up, a framed photo, a small sculpture Isabel had loved, was a tangible piece of the life my daughter had declared worthless. I wrapped each one with care, not with sadness, but with a sense of peaceful finality. I was not packing up a home. I was archiving a life well lived. I heard the car before I saw it, at the sound of tires screeching as it took the corner onto my street too fast. A dark, expensive sedan slammed to a halt at the curb. Doors flew open. 4 figures emerged, their movements stiff with fury. It was Chloe Jordan and his parents. Their wedding attire, which was supposed to look elegant and celebratory, now looked like costumes for a tragedy. Their faces were red, contorted by a toxic cocktail of rage and humiliation. They marched across the lawn like an invading army, but then they stopped. all four of them frozen mid-stride. Their eyes had locked onto something that wasn't part of their battle plan. It was a simple sign staked firmly into the grass near the rose trellis. It was bright red and white, and the single word on it was impossible to misinterpret. Sold. I watched through the window as the reality of the sign hit them. I saw Chloe's hands fly to her mouth. I saw the look of utter disbelief on Mrs. Vance's face. The house they were coming to argue about, the asset Chloe had planned to liquidate for her fresh start, was already gone. It was no longer a bargaining chip. It was no longer hers to covet. It was a closed chapter. That moment of stunned silence was broken by a raw scream of pure rage from Chloe. She bolted toward the house, her wedding shoes sinking into the soft turf. She didn't bother to knock. She threw the front door open with such force that it slammed against the wall, the sound echoing through the half-empty rooms. She found me by the fireplace, calmly taping up a box labeled Isabel's Books. "How could you?" she shrieked, her voice cracking with hysteria. Jordan and his parents crowded in the doorway behind her, their faces a gallery of disgust and fury. "You did this, all of it. You ruined my wedding, my one perfect day. You did this just to humiliate me, to humiliate us in front of everyone we know." Her words washed over me, but they had no power anymore. They were just noise, the meaningless sound of a storm that had already passed. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't meet her rage with my own. I calmly finished taping the seam of the box, running my hand over it to make sure it was secure. I picked up a black marker and clearly wrote the box number in the top corner. My deliberate, quiet movements seemed to infuriate her even more. "Are you even listening to me?" she screamed. "My life is ruined, and you're just packing boxes." I finally put the marker down. I turned to face her and the other three silent accusers in my doorway. I looked at my daughter's tear-streaked, hate-filled face. I looked at the Vances, who were staring at me as if I were a bug to be squashed. I felt nothing but a great, quiet distance from all of them. "You're wrong, Chloe," I said, and my voice was so calm, so devoid of emotion, it seemed to startle her into silence. "I didn't ruin anything. I repurposed it." I walked past her, over to the mantelpiece above the fireplace. The portrait of Isabel was gone, already packed away safely. In its place there was a single professionally printed trifold brochure. It was the only object I had left out. I picked it up. It felt heavy in my hand, heavy with meaning, heavy with the weight of a life's true value. I turned back to them. Chloe was watching me, her eyes narrowed with suspicion and confusion. I didn't say another word. I simply held the brochure out to her. This was it, the final blueprint, the explanation for everything. It was all there, printed in black and white, waiting to deliver the final, devastating blow. Chloe snatched the brochure from my hand, her movements sharp and angry. Jordan and his parents huddled behind her, all four of them peering down at the glossy paper as if it were a strange and threatening object. I watched their faces, a silent observer to the final act of a play I had written. I saw the first flicker of confusion as Chloe read the title on the front, the Isabel Maxwell Foundation. Her eyes shot up to meet mine, a question hanging in the air that she dared not ask. Her expression shifted as she opened it. I knew what she was seeing. A beautiful, smiling photograph of her mother taken in our garden years ago. Beside it, the mission statement written in elegant, clear prose, dedicated to providing full 4-year university scholarships for promising underprivileged students who wish to pursue a degree in civil engineering at the state university. I saw the moment the words registered in her mind, her brow furrowed. Engineering, my profession, the boring, worthless career she had so thoroughly mocked. I saw Mrs. Vance's lips tighten. She understood the financial implications of a foundation far better than my daughter did. This was no mere gesture. This was a fortress. But it was the back of the brochure that delivered the final, fatal blow. Chloe turned it over and her breath hitched. Her whole body went rigid. The Vances leaned in closer. There, at the bottom of the page, was a short section under a simple heading, Founding Endowments. And below that heading was a single line and entry that transformed this entire act from a simple charity into a devastatingly precise rebuttal. It was a number, an exact to the dollar figure, representing the total itemized budget of her canceled dream wedding. The blood drained from Chloe's face. The rage, the fury, the self-righteous indignation, it all evaporated, replaced by a hollow, vacant shock. She finally understood. She had not been the victim of an angry tantrum. She had been the subject of a meticulous structural reassessment. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with a horror that was finally devastatingly silent. She had no more words. I had taken them all. I looked at my daughter, a stranger, standing in the ruins of her own creation, and I finally spoke, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of a lifetime. "You told me my life was worthless, Chloe," I began. "You told me I had nothing to be proud of. And after our last conversation, I realized you were right about one thing. The life I was living, the one where my only purpose was to serve as a silent bank account for a lifestyle I didn't respect, that life was worthless. So I took your advice. I stopped living it. You told me not to show up at your wedding, and I respected your wishes. I didn't show up. Instead, I built something. I took the resources meant for a 6-hour party, and I invested them in a legacy that will last for generations. A legacy that honors your mother and the values she stood for. A legacy built on the very profession you called meaningless." I let the words settle in the quiet room. This foundation, Chloe, and the lesson that comes with it is my final wedding gift to you. It's the lesson of what a life's work actually looks like. It is the undeniable value of building things that last. I didn't wait for a response. There was nothing more to say. The project was complete. I turned away from them, walked over to the box I had packed earlier, the one labeled Isabel's Books. I lifted it into my arms. It felt solid, real. I walked out of the living room, past my silent, shattered daughter, past the stunned and useless Vances. I walked out the front door into the afternoon sun. And I did not look back. I left them standing in the empty shell of a house that was no longer mine, to face the consequences they had engineered for themselves. And as I placed the box in the passenger seat of my car, I felt a sense of peace settle over me, as quiet and as strong as a perfectly laid foundation. My new life had just begun. This entire experience taught me a lesson. I was 71 years in the making. For too long, I had confused my duty as a provider with my purpose as a father. I thought giving my daughter what she wanted was the same as giving her what she needed. When she called my life worthless, she forced me to finally calculate its true value. I learned that a life's worth isn't measured by the wealth you can give away, but by the principles you refuse to sacrifice. My greatest project was never a bridge or a building, but a legacy of integrity, a lesson I ultimately had to teach. What do you believe is the most valuable legacy a person can leave behind? Share your thoughts in the comments below.